Welcome to The Explainer. We take key sources and break them down into these clear, focused presentations for you.
So today we're dissecting some policy discussions from a pretty unconventional source. A former US president appearing on a YouTube influencer show. And as you can see from this quote, that's a point he made himself. It was a setting really designed to be different.
All right, so let's dive right in. The conversation itself, it was all over the map. They talked about boxing, his TV career, you name it. But for this explainer, we're going to zero in on the specific claims he made about foreign and domestic policy. So, here's how we've broken it down. First, we'll look at foreign policy, specifically Iran and Venezuela. Then, we'll shift to border security. And finally, we'll tie it all together with his core message.
Okay, let's kick things off with Iran. Now, what's really interesting here is how he framed his administration's actions. It followed this very clear pattern. First, he'd lay out a problem. Then he'd describe the action they took. And finally, he'd state the result, a classic problem-action-result framework.
So the problem, according to him? It was a long-standing threat from Iran, from what he called evil people. He painted this picture of a 47-year history of violence, something that he believed just had to be dealt with.
And the action he took in response? Well, he described it as a series of very decisive military moves, things like taking out leadership figures, like Soleimani. And then he used this phrase, wiping out their navy and their air force, which, most likely means crippling their ability to operate effectively.
Right. So what was the ultimate goal here? The crucial point, the big why, was to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And he didn't just frame this as some abstract policy goal. No. He presented it as a direct response to what he saw as an existential threat to allies, specifically saying a nuclear Iran could have wiped Israel off the face of the planet.
Okay, so let's shift gears now. We're moving from the Middle East to a totally different challenge in South America, specifically Venezuela.
And you'll see a similar pattern here. He starts by framing the issue as a direct threat to safety inside the U.S. His claim was that the Maduro regime was, 1, sending drugs our way, and 2, literally emptying its prisons and sending, as he put it, the most violent prisoners right to the United States.
So what was the action taken to stop this? Well, he described it as a great military attack, a really direct and forceful intervention against the Maduro regime. He framed it as something that was not only necessary, but also something people had wanted for a long time.
And the claimed result? Well, this quote right here pretty much sums up his take on it. He presented the whole operation as a complete success, saying that the situation in Venezuela had, quote, worked out incredibly well. All right, so from foreign policy, the conversation then shifted inward to one of his absolute signature issues, border security.
And what's really striking here is the stark contrast he drew. On the one hand, he described what he inherited as an open border with, bad people coming from jails and mental institutions. And on the other hand, the after. Well, he claimed that after his policies for the last 9 months, literally nobody had come into the country. It's a really absolute statement designed to show total control.
And to back up that argument about bad people coming in, he dropped a very specific number, 11,888. He claimed that was the number of murderers who had entered the country and that his administration was actively removing or jailing them. He then clarified the strategy. The idea wasn't just about everyone. The focus of immigration enforcement was really zeroed in on who he identified as dangerous criminals. As he said, the main priority was to get the bad ones out.
So we've looked at Iran, Venezuela, and border security. But how did he tie all these different policy actions together? Well, it all circles back to his core political message, framing everything as part of a much bigger story.
And that story starts with a narrative of decline. He painted a picture of a nation that, just a year and a half before, was basically dead. A country that was being, in his words, laughed at all over the world. And then, he flips that grim picture completely on its head with this story of a dramatic restoration. To make his point, he used an anecdote, quoting the king of Saudi Arabia, who he says told him the U.S. had become the hottest country anywhere in the world. A total reversal. And this whole narrative arc, right, going from decline to restoration, well, it's all encapsulated in that famous slogan, "Make America Great Again." He presented this as the real mission, the driving force behind all of those policy decisions we just talked about.
Which leaves us with one final thought. Putting aside the specific policies for a second, the medium itself, a YouTube show, is really notable.
It really makes you wonder, right? What does delivering major policy arguments like this signal about the future of political communication?